Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Telford Wrekin Council Planning Committee. This evening's meeting is held in public to ensure that all those involved or interested in the planning applications can see and hear how the decisions are made. It's important that the speakers are able to present their information without interruption and that council members of the committee are able to hear and consider the material presented. Only those people who have been notified are able to speak. I would ask everyone else to remain quiet, not to interrupt the meeting and to allow the members to make their decisions. I remind everyone that council meetings can be photographed or recorded, and I would ask all participants to recognise the importance of the planning system process. Please, with everyone silent or turn off their mobile phones. Right, okay. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. Jane?
We have apologies from Councillor Jackie Loveridge and Councillor Culdup Sahota is substitute, and Councillor Raj Mehta and Councillor James Lavery is substitute.
Thank you.
I think you got that wrong.
Yeah, it's all good.
Well, we know we've got substitutes.
I'm here for Jackie.
Yeah, we know we've got substitutes, okay?
Did I not say that? No.
The other way around. No.
As long as you'll be fully trained, we're all right. Right. Item 2, declarations of interest.
Chair, I'm close to Jason North Road, Agate North Road. The application TPL, but I've no interest with them at all.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Any other declarations? No? Right. Item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. To confirm the minutes of the previous meeting, are they true and correct record?
Yes.
Chair.
Yes.
All agreed?
Yes.
Thank you. Deferred or withdrawn application on item 4.
There are none, Chair.
There aren't any. Item 5, no site visits planned.
No, Chair.
Item 6 then is the tree preservation order. This is the Borough of Telford Wrekin, trees on the land of the North Highgate Road, Wellington, tree preservation order 2021. Right. Ian, to start, is the... Yeah, sorry Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a provisional tree preservation order in respect to these trees was made on the 6th of April this year. It's here before members to determine whether to confirm the order. It's a group of 15 trees on land to the north of Haygate Road. 14 of the trees are oak trees, and there's one sycamore tree. The trigger for the provisional tree preservation order was what is in the officer's opinion a clear threat from development activities on land close to the trees, and as members are probably aware, the development is centred around an outline planning permission granted in April 2016 for 330 dwellings, and the reserve matters was granted in March 2018. Gavin Onions is here, our expert arboricultural officer. Gavin will go into more detail, but in his report you'll see his comment that the tree-related conditions have been continually breached over the course of the development. But notwithstanding that, the developers have objected to the making of the tree preservation order. The objectors' letters are within the papers, but members need to focus on the issues in hand, which is whether it's expedient in the interests of amenity to preserve and protect these trees, because there's quite a lot of there's issues around this development that might come out during. We have some public speakers, which is a little bit unusual, but the chair has allowed the public speaking using his discretion, which is entirely appropriate. The officer's firm recommendation is that these trees should be protected, but before the public speakers start, there's one recommendation part of the recommendation that will need an amendment, which I'll raise now. The recommendation on the face of it says resolve to confirm the order without modification, but I think Gavin will go into a little bit more detail. But one of the trees, which is the sycamore tree, has been felled. I think it was in a bad way anyway, but Gavin will give more detail. So the recommendation will be with the modification T15. It's the last tree identified on the tree preservation order, which is the sycamore, and that one, it's proposed that one will be excluded from a confirmed order if members are minded to confirm it. So I'll come back after the public speaking with a very short further comments, but then it primarily will be Gavin. But I think probably appropriate, Chair, to go to the public speakers.
Yes, we'll follow the usual format. It's been introduced, so we'll then have the public speakers. And I've got 2 public speakers and the applicant's letter, which has all been circulated to you all, so you know what they're saying there. So can I ask Councillor Jackie Seymour to have 3 minutes, please, Jackie?
Yeah. Thank you. Let me start by saying that I fully support this application for a tree preservation order on this development for what I now clearly understand is 14 trees, one unfortunately already needing to be removed. You have seen and heard, well, you've seen, I haven't heard the tree officer's detailed responses to the objections raised by the developer's arboriculture specialist. In particular, the tree officer has drawn attention to condition 3 of the approved reserved matters planning application, TWC 2017-0643, which specified the trees which were to be protected on this development, and especially the restrictions relating to the RPAs, i.e. the root protection areas. As can be seen from the photographs taken by the tree officer, some of them as recently as the 11th of August this year, this condition has been very largely ignored by the developers, and abusive treatment of the RPAs by construction machinery has been allowed and continues to be allowed, even in areas where, by all accounts, building development is supposed to have been completed. At this point, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that, prior to final approval of this application, the management of both of the development companies involved at that time were keen to engage in quarterly meetings with the Haygate Fields Liaison Group, albeit it wasn't a planning condition. Even though engagement at that time involved some travel by the developers' representatives, attendance was moderately good, although responses to the points raised at the meetings was less so. However, since the COVID lockdown, these meetings have taken place as Teams meetings. This should have made it easier for the developers to engage. But regrettably, they failed to take part at all, and following the raising of concerns about tree protection in general some 6 months ago, and in relation to the veteran oak T1 much earlier than that, both of the companies made it clear that they would not be taking any further part in these meetings. Not exactly a sign of positive and construction engagement. It's clear to me that the protection of these trees for the overall benefit to the site, as well as to the trees, is absolutely necessary. The developer's argument that at least some of the trees should not be included on the grounds of their poor condition, which has come about as a direct result of their mismanagement, should be ignored, because the tree officer is convinced that, with care, they can yet be saved. I therefore strongly urge you to support this TPO for the 14 trees that still exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. John Pattison, please. You have 3 minutes, John.
Thank you, Chair. My name is John Pattinson. I'm speaking on behalf of the Haygate Fields Group, which represents residents living near the new housing development. We fully support the Haygate Fields tree preservation order as proposed by the Council. The Haygate Fields area contains a number of beautiful old trees on the housing development which need full protection. We do not understand the objections by the house builders. On one hand, they say no TPO is necessary because the trees on the site have been protected by the house builders through the planning process. On the other hand, they claim many trees have been damaged and so are not worthy of protection. This confusion may stem from their consultant only visiting the site once and relying on Google Earth images to trace the development of the site. The house builders certainly do not know what's happening on their site, as they boycotted the liaison meetings over the last 2 years. This is a discourtesy to local residents and downright rudeness to the chair of the group, Councillor Jackie Seymour, the hard-working elected local councillor. Your officers, especially your trees officer, know what is happening. And certainly all of the local residents in HFG know exactly what has happened on the ground. We have watched with despair as the house builders and their subcontractors have pressed on regardless without protecting the trees. Nowhere is this more apparent than with TPO Tree 1 at the main entrance to the site. We have witnessed inadequate protection, equipment and plant left by its side, and unauthorised changes to the level of the site, which means that the tree is left in a pool of water for much of the winter months. Many of the other trees on the site have been endangered in a similar manner. In conclusion, it's not just expedient for the council to approve this TPO, but in the view of HFG, it's absolutely essential that it does so. We urge all of the councillors on the committee to approve the TPO and protect the beautiful trees on the Haygate Field site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. The objector is asking for the tree preservation order not to be confirmed. Yes, we have a layer of protection provided by the planning conditions, but as can be seen from the photographs and the summaries you've heard, these trees are quite obviously all under threat of damage and harm. T15 has already been mentioned, a sycamore that's been felled, so it'll have to be removed from the tree preservation order should members be minded to confirm it. All the other trees are, in the officer's view, worthy of protection and should be protected on the grounds of, as I've said before, expediency and amenity. Officers are working with the developer, but it is considered that the 14 trees need and merit this further layer of protection which can be applied by confirming the tree preservation order. I think that's it from me. I'll now hand over to Gavin, Chair.
Gavin,
if that's
do you want
okay.
to reply to the points made up to now, the public?
Oh no, they're with us.
All right. Can you outline this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously the trees, collection of 14 oaks, all of them appear on the 1882 historic map of the Haygate area. They only drew mature trees at that time, so they're in the region of 140 plus years. The TPO, it's a little contrasting with the objector's response. The existing tree surveys that were provided by the applicants when they first came to the site. For instance, T1, which was, it's been labelled a veteran oak, it's 157 centimetres across. It had 10 characterising features of a veteran oak and was given 40 years plus and rated as a veteran, so an irreplaceable habitat within the landscape. But the objector's letter have categorised it as a U, meaning that it is 10 years or less estimated remaining contribution. They're all oak trees, as I've said, and I think with a little bit of work and obviously decompaction of the previous damage caused, not only to the trees you see in the photos at the back, but further to T14, I believe, as well, which there's a current condition compliance case on. I think there would be a merit to the amenity of the area for years to come. The other point I would say is that even in due course, when the trees do have to come out, the TPO would allow us to ask for replacement, so the amenity of the area would be continued long after the planning conditions had lapsed. So we would always be able to ask for a tree in the areas of the open space. As I've said, T15 was felled during the making of the TPO, and a subsequent site visit by myself and the planning enforcement officer, and that's when the trees in the centre, as you can see in the photographs, were also pruned. So that's also a current case, I believe. You can see the stump of T15. But again, in 2017, the sycamore tree was rated as a C, and none of this was evident. So over the 4 years of construction, as you can see the levels raised in the photo, it's unfortunately come to its demise.
Okay, Gavin. Thank you. Open to the committee then.
Just a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Shouldn't this, for the sake of balance, be read out by somebody in full, or
No,
should it
no,
be
it
on
was-
the, for the people who are out there
It
are
was,
not familiar with it?
it was submitted late, and it's for the committee to consider. And that's why all the committee had a copy of it. You also emailed out to us all yesterday. That's how late it was. So it doesn't need. It's not going to be read out. It's
Okay.
there. And with fairness, officers have referred to that
Okay.
and what the objections are.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I just ask, tree 15, can we not insist on a replacement for that one if we decide to preserve the trees?
Gavin, can you answer that?
Yeah, the replacement for the tree's always been agreed outside of this, because there's also been an ash tree and another sycamore tree felled within the site, so they're all subject to the planning conditions as is. So they're entitled, or they have to replace it if it dies within 5 years of them being on site. So the sycamore tree, I think we looked at it before it leafed up, and then it didn't go into leaf, and so it was removed when the other trees were felled. So a replacement is being arranged by the developers.
For that same area?
For the same, yeah.
Right.
It is a good point, because I was thinking about, well, we were thinking about keeping it in, because if a protected tree is felled, you can insist on a replacement. But what the officers have achieved through the enforcement of the conditions is that they'll get a replacement for this tree through the conditions and through the discussions that Gavin's had. So
I think in another aspect as well, the tree preservation order would allow the local authority an element of control over the works going ahead on it, because a lot of the trees which were condemned in the objection letter did come into leaf later on, but at the same time they were pruned just afterwards. And the thing about pruning old and veteran trees is it's always down and in, and they've pruned them up and out. So it would have been nice, because it's less for the root to shoot for them to leaf up. So it would have been better if we'd have had control over it. But going forward, if it's confirmed, obviously they'd have to put in a work order and a veteran tree management plan, ideally, which would then allow the safety of the trees with regard to any possible branch failures, and also hopefully making the best of them, because they've not been. No one's done anything to them except for the work that was carried out between the TPO being made and where we are today.
But moving forward, how are we going to monitor the progress and what happens with the trees over the next 12 months?
Well, if they wanted to work on the trees again, they'd have to put in an application via the planning process, which is a 6 to 8 week application process, and they'd have to come up with what they propose to do with the trees, rather than just having a landscape contractor come from somewhere and decide that he can't get his mower under it, so he'll be doing this and that. So it adds that element of control as well.
Okay, Janice. Ian?
Yes, Chairman. I'm afraid there seems to be a common occurrence with some developers, is that they get planning permission, they agree to conditions to protect trees on the site, the development site, and then completely ignore them and cause damage to them. I know of cases on development in my area where trees have been supposedly protected by the developer and they don't exist anymore. So I am in favour of confirming this TPO for trees. Is it T1 to T14 inclusive? And I'd so move.
Thank you, Ian. Well, move on.
Yeah.
Any other committee wish to make a comment?
Just
Peter?
briefly, yeah. It's clear from the evidence we've been given that there's a need for an extra layer of protection on these trees. It is that simple. The objector thinks they're going to protect them anyway, so why not give that extra layer? So again, I'm totally in favour of this because I think it's necessary.
Yeah, I'm all in favour of the recommendation and protecting them. But I just, something that since the UNO report that came out a couple of weeks ago, people seems to be a lot more in my ward. They phoned up and said, well,
why are they cutting that tree down or this, that? At one time, they were sort of on the other side, but now, since, you know, the CO2 and the green politics of it, people all seems to be. So, you know, I'm merely following my constituents' lead on this, and I think, yes, the tree should be protected.
Anybody else want any comments?
Just,
Jim?
you know the additional trees, well, the trees that are replacing the ones that have already been disposed of. Is there no way we can protect those as well? Because if they can't be trusted to do what they said from the planning application, I don't know whether we can trust them to install replacements.
They would still be protected under the planning conditions, which are valid for 5 years from when the application was
I
approved.
mean, they're down now, aren't they? And I mean, so they haven't taken care of the regulations as of yet. So if we put a further layer onto those 3 trees.
Which, the ones that we're protecting will have that basically in perpetuity protection, and if they're felled, they will be required to be replaced directly through that legislation. The planning conditions, I'm not sure what it depends on the wording of them, but you're right. They don't. I doubt whether they confer a in perpetuity protection for the trees and an in perpetuity requirement to replace, because that's not how. I'm right, aren't I, Val? It's not how the planning conditions work. But they try and create a situation that then looks after itself as far as reasonably possible. And some of the trees, the new trees, wouldn't merit protection orders because
they'd be young and obviously easily replaceable, whereas the ones we're looking at are all over 140 years old. I think the most of the area is yet to be landscaped as well. I think from site visits they've only really done around the houses, so all of the open space and obviously the area that's subject to the mound, which is subject to a planning appeal for removal, that's yet to be landscaped as well. So there is still quite a lot of tree planting to go on the site. But with regard to TPO in new trees, it would be if it was expedient to do so at the time.
Okay.
Second it anyway.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Yeah, second it.
Subject, of course, to taking T15 off and having it's T1 to T14 then. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. So the T preservation order goes on now, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, Gavin?
Yes, thank you.
Item 7 on the agenda is a plan application for determination, which we haven't got one. It's actually land at Ironstone, Lawley, Telford, Shropshire, and it's TWC 2010, so 0828. Okay, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. This deed of variation seeks to vary the affordable housing element of Phase 10 of the Lawley Sustainable Urban Extension, otherwise known as the SU. Currently, 12.5% affordable housing is obligated. The developers are asking the local planning authority to agree 0% affordable housing to allow them to apply for Homes England funding, which could provide 10% affordable housing on this phase. The deed of variation was previously presented to Planning Committee on the 30th of June 2021, whereby members resolved to grant the deed of variation. In dialogue since the resolution, and through no fault of the developer, Taylor Wimpey, it is apparent that the information presented to Planning Committee at the time was not a true reflection of the request. The deed of variation is once again being presented to members to reconsider the resolution in line with the submission as outlined within this report. There is a speaker on this application, Chair, so I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
We do have a speaker against the application, Councillor John York from the Parish Council.
Chair.
Welcome. Welcome again, John.
Yeah, 3 in a row and a bonus point, I think, so. Right, yeah, thank you very much. Lawley and Overdale Parish Council object most vociferously to this application and the recommendation. At the 30th of June committee, I sat in this very same chair, having wasted time preparing an objection to the published report recommending 0% affordable housing. Committee members then present will remember the debacle evident when officers advised the wrong report had been submitted and presented a few days before committee a new one for approval. This reflected a new 10% figure for affordable housing and was endorsed by the attending developer's representative. My parish council then reluctantly accepted that 10%, given that para 64 of the NPPF expects at least 10% from a development. The chair of planning committee on that day promised on live feed an investigation into the administrative and planning fiasco that had emanated to ensure no repeat. But here we are again today with a report detailing in para 1.1 that we were presented with the incorrect information in that alternative June 21 report. This situation is a serious abject performance by the planning authority, whose performance on Lawley Sue development is now impossible to defend against the electorate's viewpoint. Developer, viability, consultant and council subscribe to the view that even 10% affordable is not viable. But remember, a developer clears around 50% average profit per property. The maths for the whole estate thus easily demonstrate no poverty line for him exists. It should not be down to us taxpayer to fund affordable homes via a grant from Homes England, and as you will see, even that cannot be assured. This application in para 2.1 advises approval in 2005 for 3,300 properties, a school and community facility. Approval of this report means the 2005 conditions of 25% affordable will fail to materialise, just as the conditioned free grant is community facility, as the authority have failed to enforce its own approved planning conditions for this item. Concerning issues continue, neighbour consultation is reported as not undertaken, a repeat of the same failure highlighted by us at the June meeting. Summarising, Parish Council object most strongly to the recommendation. Some committee members voiced their annoyance at the June meeting of the situation they were put into, but legal officers' warning of possible appeal costs, as they said, put them in an awkward position. Planning applications are expected to be decided upon planning merit and adherence to policy and conditions. The fear of cost should not be a decision factor, yet this is all we hear from the authority. Planning committee must decide, but our residents deserve a stronger planning consideration that we have been and are currently experiencing.
Thank you, John. The matter was raised up to the Cabinet Member for Planning, as I promised to do.
Yeah, thanks.
But I can't go any further than that, really. Right, Andy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as I was saying, this application seeks to vary the Section 106 connected to the Lawley Sue, which was originally granted permission in 2005. The original Section 106 agreement sought 25% affordable housing across Lawley. By way of background, since the economic downturn of 2008, it has been necessary for the applicants, which consists of the developer consortium, so different developers, to reduce the amount of affordable housing on phases approved since 2008. As an example, phases 7 and 8 were approved with 15% affordable housing. Phases 9 and 10 were approved with 12.5% affordable housing. Viability evidence has been presented by the applicants based on the market value of the land today, which proves that phase 10 development is unviable. The appraisal also demonstrates that even without any affordable housing, phase 10 still does not provide a financial return to the developers that meets the requirements of the NPPF. The council has had this viability appraisal independently assessed by an external consultant who agrees with the detailed viability information provided and supports the applicant's position. The developers are seeking to provide 10% affordable housing on phase 10 via Homes England. However, In order for the development to be eligible for the Homes England funding, the local authority must first agree to 0% affordable housing through obligation. If successful, this would result in the delivery of 4 less affordable units. All of the units are nationally described space standard compliant, which is a requirement of Homes England funding. Taking these factors into consideration, officers accept the applicant's justification that the Section 106 as approved is now unviable with respect to Phase 10 and needs to be reconsidered for the applicants in capacity as willing developers to continue bringing forward the site and prevent it stalling. There are no other obligations to renegotiate, and as such the only matter to consider is the variation of the affordable housing requirement. As a result of this, officers consider that the benefits in terms of allowing the site to continue to come forward will significantly and demonstrably outweigh the harm brought about by the reduction of affordable housing. And therefore, it is recommended that the application to vary the Section 106 agreement in respect of Phase 10 is approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Before us as a committee. Yes, Kelly.
So who was it that we were dealing with this in June, and we're back talking about it now? So it says it wasn't a true representation. Who was that by? Who was it not represented truthfully by in June?
The committee report stated that the Section 106 would secure the 10% affordable housing. What it should have said is that it would be 0%, and that the 10% affordable housing may be provided through the Homes England funding.
I think if you can just add to that, in terms of the report that was originally set out, said it was 0% was coming forward from the Section 106 and through conditions, there was no tie, but the 10% looking forward through the Homes England grant funding afterwards. There was then an update that presented to Planning Committee on the basis of then what officers then became apparent of. However, and that's what members then considered and resolved to approve. As it's been going through the legals and the solicitors, that's where it's become further apparent that certainly when people not sign up to that agreement, and it is 0% affordable coming through from planning condition and the Section 106, so no controls. And that's the only point though that Homes England grant funding can be applied for.
Yeah, because they could have said 0, and they said, oh, we have to do 10, which is why we granted it, wasn't it, in the first place, because it appeared they were being exceptionally reasonable when there was no reason to be. So that was the reason at the time. So it's just a shame in August we're having the same conversation with a different story, isn't it?
Janice?
I find it a little frustrating that we're having to base a decision when we haven't really got the facts and figures here to say what the details are. How much are the developers going to make out of this? I also feel backed into a corner on some of these recently where they are saying about affordable housing. I mean, if we're going to cut it all the time to nothing, then that's going to keep happening all the time.
Okay. So we seek independent advice. Okay, so it's not done by somebody in-house. It is independent, that is specifically trained and has the ability to look at viability. Okay, and they also have professional codes of conduct to deal with. The information has therefore been assessed and questions asked where relevant to understand the information that's in front of them, and they have come out with the exception that the development itself as it stands, because of the situation of how the land value has changed from the point of purchase, which was at the housing price, which was before the crash, that the development site can no longer facilitate the affordable housing contributions or the affordable housing that was coming forward through the Section 106 obligations. And in fact, it's not only just from the 12% come down any further to even decrease it, it's to the point of it being 0. No affordable housing can come forward from the viability. Okay. Now, an executive summary is available, should be available online for you to see, as is all consultation comments. It's a public file. Okay. What we represent to you is what we can do in an application. and hence why we did some training recently on viability, so that members can understand how the information is processed, taking account of land values and abnormals on site.
If it's only assistance, Chair, if the developer didn't provide any affordables on phase 10, at section 6.3 of the report, 6.33, it shows they will still make a loss of £447,000, which compares to if they were to provide 25% affordable, they would have a deficiency of just over £1 million. It's £1 million and £1 million, 33,000. So that's the level of deficit that they're looking at, even if they were to provide these affordables as open market, which hopefully they won't do if they get this Homes England grant funding.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. Peter?
Yeah, as you know, I wasn't very happy with the reduction to 10%. I felt like we're being held ransom. I have to say I agree with every word that Councillor York has said. I don't like the idea that we force the council to go and battle against someone because they refuse something and the risk of losing funds, but I think a time's come, especially with this one, where we got to just say, I'm sorry, no. Go away and either make it viable or leave it for someone else to come along who can develop this land. It feels to me like we're being put to ransom on this one. There's a half promise somewhere in the future of a few affordable houses, but it really doesn't cut it this time. I'm sorry, but I would feel I would have to refuse this because I think it's all gone too far, and there's been an almighty cock-up somewhere along the line by somebody. That's not our fault. So I completely agree with what Councillor York says, and I would be one to refuse this. I'm sorry, but there you go.
Jim?
I tend to agree with Councillor Scott. The guys who obtained this land obtained it, when was it, 2005? And the price they paid for it, 2005, and the value of it today is a significant profit that's not been included in the equation of the overall scheme. So to some extent they're being very selective on what figures they use and when they use it. My view is if they want to build houses on a site, they know the requirement for affordable houses, and they shouldn't really put a plan forward without them. I'd really think they're taking us for mugs.
Yeah, Nigel?
Well, you probably know what I'm going to say. I agree totally with everything that the Councillor York said. I mean, it's another loss of affordable housing, and Councillor Scott's quite correct. We are being held to ransom all the time on this. There's a property downturn. There's a land value downturn. Well, the land was always going to change in value over the last 15, 16, 17 years, and really, that should have everything like that should have been taken into account. I mean, unusually, I usually have a glance through viability, but I had a real good look at this one, and so even the viability assessment was done 18 months ago. There's nothing that's actually very recent here. Now, we had the viability training last week, and where the clarity is required here, because the guy said that if affordable housing was being done by a social housing provider, then it wasn't included in the viability assessment. And yeah, we're being played for fools a little bit here, because what they're saying is oh well, we're not going to do we might be able to do a deal with Wrekin Housing Trust, but we don't know. So therefore, it comes to committee. Then committee's expected to say zero affordable housing, and then a couple of weeks' time they've done a deal with Wrekin Housing Trust, and they've got their way, and it is quite correct. We should dig our heels in on this, and if it's not going to go ahead, it's not going to go ahead, because actually if you go through the accommodation schedule. I mean, we've banged on about all the problems that you've got with the houses that they're putting, and there's no parking and everything. And, you know, of the 3-bedroom houses that are going to go on phase 11, only 11% of them have actually got a garage. None of the 2-bed houses have got garages. You've got it, you know, sort of, there's no mention at all of where any electric charging is supposed to happen. We know that there's problems within Lawley at the moment, in so many problems, and all we're doing is we're just making the same mistakes again and again and again. So we do need to turn around and say, no, enough is enough, and, you know, sort of, we need to face them down, because it's ridiculous. You know, we're being asked to approve zero affordable housing on the off chance that we might get some, which is ridiculous. We're the planning authority. We ought to be saying, no, we want affordable housing, and we're going to have it. And if you can't do it, we'll get somebody who can do it. Now, apart from that, in the report on the planning history, I was a bit concerned that the previous application that we considered in June is not actually in the planning history. Now, I would have expected that to have been in, because, I mean, there's obviously been quite a major cock-up on this one, right from the, you know, sort of in June. And, you know, sort of, I hope that the processes have been reviewed so that we don't have a ridiculous situation like this again. But at least in the report, to make sure that everything is above board, shouldn't the application that was the reduction that was considered in June be actually in the planning history on this report?
It's there at the top of the report to say it was considered in June. It's still the same application, it's still the same report.
Yeah, paragraph 1.1.
It's not a separate decision.
So it doesn't go into planning history?
It's not a separate decision. It's the same thing that's coming forward, and that's clear in terms of the report that's been printed
Even
at the top.
You might have different members. Is everybody here in June?
And it's the same in terms of that consideration. We haven't issued that decision.
Okay.
So it was just a resolution. It didn't follow through to become just what you said. Actually, it didn't follow through to become a planning decision, a determination. Because I think we've come back. It's a because when you reach a resolution in committee, that doesn't instantly produce a planning commission. There's always a gap. And so there was no actual refusal or approval of the decision. That's why it's not in the history. I think you can find planning histories to clear decisions, don't you, which are actually followed through rather than committee decisions.
So what's the time difference between making a decision and it's actually becoming ready?
When the signatures are signed on both the Section 106 obligation and the application. In this case, it's not an application, it's just a Section 106 or the deed of variation, and that's not been signed because as during drafting, that's where the parties haven't agreed.
It's quite useful because we can bring things back when things change between resolution and actual, and something that you need to know about before we actually. So sometimes it's quite useful to have the gap.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure the developers are delighted to have. Okay, sorry, Chair, I've got nothing else.
Okay,
to say.
Nigel. Yeah. Anybody else? Coolip, and then Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, when I read this, you know, affordable down 106 and so on and so forth, I just wanted to ask, you know, all these facts and figures from the officers and the house values and financial viability. It's all pucker. They're not sort of pulling wools on our eyes, is it, on this side, and they're saying, well, we are pleading, you know, poverty. There's nothing we can do. Normally, I've been doing this for about nearly 18 years now. We normally go, you know, they offer us so much, and we try to up it a little or something. But here, there's nothing there really, and that's what makes me feel uneasy. But again, I repeat my question. They're not, you know, having us on, are they? They're not pulling.
No.
This is it, is it?
No, Councillor Sorry. So this is true and accurate information has been provided to the council, and that has independently been assessed.
And that Turley, you know, company.
At the time, it was done by Turley's, but it is a professional consultant that we use. He's no longer at Turley's, and it was done by Turley's and RLD. So there's two professional, independent consultants that have been involved in that, who reviewed that in autumn 2020, and went through those issues in terms of the land values, looking at the cost of construction, going through all those abnormals. And I would have to say as well, in terms of the market that we're in, that construction prices have increased as well. There have been issues in terms of the remediation on this site as they've gone through and tried to develop it, and having to go back in and redesign and putting in more infrastructure, which has impacted on the costs. And that was explained in the report. Now, in the report that we originally set out to committee as well, we were clear that there was 0% affordable. The site itself could not provide affordable housing, and members accepted that. So you've already resolved and accepted that viability report and how that's been assessed. There is no difference in the information that's been submitted and considered by you this evening. It's just the resolution in terms of how that affordable housing is provided. And we're asking you that, based on the fact that affordable housing cannot come forward through Section 106 in terms of viability, and there is a policy specifically with the NPPF that asks us to consider that matter, that we're asking that it's delivered outside of the Section 106 and the planning conditions, because that's how the access to housing and funding can come forward.
I feel uneasy about it, Charles, but on the other hand, I'll accept the word of officers.
Kelly.
Just a couple of things. I mean, how come we're talking about something that was put in 2005, 16 years ago, and we're talking about viability, after 16 years. And I don't know, I think there needs to be an incentive for this viability, doesn't there? We're talking about 16 years later, and it's just at the cost of this social housing. And also, just where are we at with this? Because legally, are we going to, if we sit here, is there a legal?
Yes, the viability report is a technical report. I mean, there's access to it through links on the committee report. There's an explanation that's been given by officers, and it's like a lot of, you very often get presented with technical reports on planning, on material planning considerations, and the viability is through the government guidance a recognised material consideration. And I know it upset one of the public speakers when it's been said before, but I do have to say it again. My advice to members is that if you refuse this on the basis that you don't accept the technical viability report, it does create a difficulty for officers in the event of an appeal and running an appeal, and it can't be ignored. I mean, I think Val would agree that you do have the situation where when you're at the appeal, where do we go when we've already asked for the technical viability advice, and it's going to be taken on board in the appeal, and it's going to be a relevant consideration, and you as members I think I might not have gathered it completely, but are you rejecting the viability report? And if you are rejecting the viability report, on what basis are you rejecting the viability report? Because viability will be a material consideration in any appeal if it goes to appeal, and that's my advice.
Jim.
It's difficult. I do understand the difficulties.
The viability report, does that base the land cost on current value or the cost they actually paid in 2005?
As I understand it, there's a recognised formula, and this is what the...
No, I'm just asking a simple question. I don't want the form. Is it the value today or the value in 2005?
I think they work on it as today. I think it's all based on today.
They look at, in terms of your training last week, as you recall, there was a framework that was set out in terms of the residual value framework.
I'm just asking a simple
I
question.
know. And in that, it included, in terms of how that gross development value was calculated, which looked at the enhanced value of from the sustainability and the design standards of the site. It may have been reduced as well on the account of the provision of the affordable housing. It also looks at the cost of developing, including land and profit, which looked at the developer to return. It looks at cumulative policy costs, and those policy costs in terms of the policy delivery, infrastructure contributions, and mitigation of the mitigation of the impact of the development. It looked as well at development costs, and it looked at the land value, and that's how that effectively residual value framework was calculated, and that is set out by RICS.
If they take into account the price of property is increasing continually as we talk, over the, I think only this week I think it was 13.5%. It's gone up in value this year, and it's anticipated it will continue to go up at that rate.
So as values also increase, so does the impact in terms of construction. Looking in terms of price of steel, price of timber, which has significantly increased over COVID. So whilst values of house prices go up, so does the cost of construction. And as we're looking at through mitigation and more viability reports that are coming forward, we're actually recognising the situation gets worse.
The COVID impact will have a peak and then it will go back down again to normality. The shortages are due to the inability to produce at the present in the COVID pandemic.
None of us can see in the future, Jim, but we've got the here and now.
Yeah.
And this is one of the problems we've got. The question I would like to ask is, if we don't agree to this, are we left with a site which is going to be empty and an eyesore and no houses at all, when in fact we do need the houses, and the government guidelines are we should be building the houses. And if you had the training last week, you'll see that we are between a rock and a hard place with this, and we are stuck there because the government the guidelines are such. I don't agree with it. I totally don't agree with it, but that's what we're stuck with.
Well, I just feel that we're being forced to roll over again and again on this, and there has to come a time when we say, sorry, back in your court, do something with it. Yeah. Come back to us and find you can suddenly find some, at least, affordable housing. It's just too easy for us all now to say yes on this one, because we're feared that it's going to cost us money, or we'll get a bad name or whatever else. Or we'll be left with a site that's undeveloped. But that site would be developed. We can't see in the future, of course not. But I just feel we can't. We'll get the blame. Let's be honest. We'll get the blame, as always happens when a committee, or rather the public, see a decision. They blame the committee. We've either got envelopes full of £10 notes stuffed in our back pockets for doing one thing, or we're not considering the residents on the other hand. And I think in this case we have to say to them, enough is enough. No.
Yeah, I'll just put in the.
Yeah, no, I know, but I just feel very strongly about this. I thought last time we dealt with it, and now we're suddenly being told it's wrong. You've now got to go down to nil. But I just feel enough's enough personally. I don't know what the rest feel, but that's the way I go.
Okay.
Ian, you know what you just said. If we go through appeal, we turn it down, and the developer will win it on the back of the viability report. Is that what you really say? It will go to appeal. If we turn it down, and then they will win it because viability report. They will accept it in light of what we were sort of talking about last week. You know, financial viability.
Yeah,
that's where we are now, aren't we?
Yeah, my advice is that the viability report, which we've done, we've got independent technical advice on the viability report. You turn up at a planning appeal, you need to put a case.
Yeah.
Our case, as well, I don't know how we'd move from that case, but I think your question from the viability report that's already been submitted and verified independently, you can imagine the situation as an appeal when what do? We have to get another viability report.
Well, can the person where it goes to. Can't they do their own viability wherever the appeal go to?
But yeah, again, my advice, the chances are that we will have a great difficulty overcoming the currently produced independent report and an appeal. The appellant will be producing our own report, our own assessment back at us. The chances are that we would lose, because the viability is given weight in an appeal, and if you and as Charles has outlined, the motivation is to have the development on the ground, and so that is the benefits lie in the building of houses. The council's position, well, I don't know whether Value's been in a situation where we've had to count out our own viability report before. I don't think we have, but then
been in a situation from this authority where we've had to go out externally to find additional technical support to support members' evidence, because members refused it, and we were unable also to find consultants that were willing to support the case to be able to represent us at appeal. Now, in terms of us as officers to be able to support the issues around viability at appeal, that's not our skill set in terms of, from a viability side of it. We're planners, from our point. We haven't got anybody in-house that can challenge the report, hence why we go external, okay? And that external party has come back to us and said it can't afford to provide any affordable housing, and profit margins on it are too low than what is set out in the NPPF, and that is very clear in policy as to what is expected from that as a profit margin, okay? It is below that level, so you would need to seek external independent consultant to be able to represent you, and I figured that we would very much struggle to find that, unless members, of course, you felt that you could defend it. But as planners, we would not be able to, and we would have to bring in advice. Now, the other point in terms of whether the planning inspector would do that, they would not. They would go on what is the appellant's evidence and what is the council's evidence. And our council's evidence at this moment supports what the appellant has said, what the applicant at this moment, shall we say, has said.
Has it ever, just on the inspector turning down viability report, anywhere in the country, it's been turned down on viability, what has happened? What did the inspector do? Do we have any, evidence of that? What do they do in a case like that?
Well, my understanding is, I can't come up with cases because I don't know any particular cases, but my understanding and my advice is that it is likely that an appeal based on this would stand a chance of success. And there's also, I know it upsets council. There is a risk that if we don't produce a reasonable case at an inquiry or an appeal, we could go down on costs, because that's how it works. So I haven't got any clear-cut cases of situations where either way. So Councillor Scott has said we need to put it back to the developer. I think we're hoping that the developers might not come back with an alternative package. They might just come back with an appeal. We don't. Which is what could happen.
Yeah. Well,
sorry.
I should say, I feel that as a committee we must, and as a council, we must stop being bullied, and that's how it feels like we're being bullied into it. If we were talking on the 30th of June and coming to a decision, that would have been different. But they've come forward yet again, and it does feel like they're taking us for mugs, as Jim says. So it's well, I just don't see how we can just roll over.
Well, answer that point.
In terms of responding to that, the developer hasn't come back to us with a different situation. In terms of the viability report, is still the same. It still says 0, and that is what committee considered at that time. The only thing is about the difference of the resolution as to how the affordable housing can move forward. Okay, so we are asking you that it actually comes forward outside of the section 106, so that there is no sign up to it, and that they look and provide it with Homes England grant funding, and they can only access that Homes England grant funding after a resolution, after a decision has been made to be able to apply for it and to deliver it.
But they still may not get it.
But yes, in terms of that. However, in terms of the viability report, it is still the same. The developer has not put anything different forward to you this evening than what they did in June. The report and the technical evidence still remains the same. And I would also say that the site is well underway in terms of delivery. There's phase 10, more specifically phase 10. Let's park all the other ones. We've got phase 10 and phase 11, the last two. Okay. Phase 11, as you've seen, has just started on site with the ground clearance. Phase 10 started before that. These are issues that have come forward as it matters whilst the delivery of that development has been underway because of the abnormals that have been found on site and the constructions of things like the wall, a geotechnical stability wall, okay, which has then had to be taken out and rebuilt. That's had a significant impact on that cost. It is underway, and so
just a minute.
And it is underway, and so the site has got nothing more to give. It isn't a case of renegotiating a full Section 106 as a blanket, okay? It's fully, well, you know, in terms of the other Section 106 contributions, it isn't anything else I can balance it off with in terms of when we're looking at what's available as contributions, which sometimes, members, you may be looking at in terms of when we're looking at that original outline application or the original full application. We're not at that stage. We're trying to prevent a site being stalled in addition to actually weighing that up against planning policy and a clear steer from government that sets out in that national planning guidance that viability is a concern and we must consider it.
Okay, thanks, Mel. Janice?
I'm really wondering why we've been sat here for the last half an hour, because it would seem we really haven't got the decision we're being told is out of our hands. Yeah. And I think we should be looking at what's good for our residents and standing up for the residents of this community. Because I do feel we've just sat here being told what we've got to do.
Nigel?
Yeah, a couple of things. Right, on this review of the viability review done by Ryder, Levitt and Bucknell, it says in previous phases, it's not in the report, you have to go into the viability assessment, and it says these people haven't reviewed the previous phases of development, but it appears the report includes allowances for abnormals, foundations, but it's not clear if these costs were included in previous viability submissions. If these costs have been included, blended across all phases of development, then given the developers claim the plot-specific abnormals for this phase, then there may be an overstatement of cost. So has this been investigated to make sure that we're not having the wool pulled over our eyes? And as Val has mentioned, you know, we cannot take into account the cost of rebuilding the wall because somebody cocked up there and it had to be rebuilt because it wasn't done properly in the first place. So that has to be taken out of any viability assessment because that's the fault of whoever built the first one in the first place. Now, I agree with everybody else on the committee, or other people or the members of the committee. We're being asked to make a decision, and we're making a decision. And as has been pointed out, how the hell can we make a decision if we're being backed into a corner and we're being told what we've got to say? At the end of the day, it's up to us to decide whether or not we accept it or not. And the thing is that if we're just being, you know, we're just becoming a rubber stamping committee because we're not being given any choice as to what we decide. Yeah, you know, I accept, you know, we get advice and, you know, sort of, and the advice is very, very useful. But at the end of the day, it's up to us to make the decision as to whether or not we accept something. And it's just like being a judge. I mean, I always feel like a judge at a trial. You know, you've got the prosecution and you've got the defence and you've got to weigh up things and you've got to make the decision, you know, based upon the evidence that you've got, your experience, what you've read and everything. So we need to make a decision, and I certainly won't be backed into a corner by being told that we might lose costs. If the council has to pay costs, well then the council has to pay costs. At the end of the day, I feel that we've done our duty, and we've made a stand, and you know, sort of. So you know, as far as I'm concerned, just get on with it. We've had so much discussion. But I would be interested to know if that's been investigated as to whether or not the costs have been spread over all the phases of development, or whether or not they haven't.
I think, listening to what's been said, we're not really in a position to question the viability report. I mean, you might have your own reasons for not going with the recommendation, but you can't. It's a technical report based on technical grounds, and if you actually think that you personally have a better understanding than the people who prepared the viability report, that needs to be stated now, and the reasons why you don't agree with the viability report. It's a separate issue from Councillor Sahota's point, which is, I think, if I've understood it correctly, you might accept the viability report, but you still think you still might think there's a reason to refuse. But are you in a position to technically challenge the viability report that's been put before you?
What I'm questioning is what the guy who has the experts who has reviewed it. They've left questions in there, and you know, I'm just wanting to know, have these questions been answered? Because obviously he's an expert, he's reviewed the viability report, and he's left some question marks on it.
If there are questions that members think need to be answered, there is besides, I mean, I don't know how popular this is, it might need to be deferred. If you don't think you've got enough information to base your decision on, you might need to defer. But on the face of what you've been presented with, you have a viability report prepared by experts, and it's very difficult for members to say that they disagree with it without saying in which respects they disagree with it. You're not actually saying that. I think, Councillor, you're saying that there's questions to be asked.
Oh, there's questions raised in the review that's been done on the viability report, and I want to know whether or not the questions that have been raised by the guy who has reviewed it, who is an expert, whether or not they've been resolved. Do we know the answers to what the questions that he's raised?
I can't confirm the dialogue, other than we would have to refer to the case officer and to the independent assessor to be able to confirm that. So at no point this evening am I able to answer that question. But it has led, the conversations that's happened between them has led to this point of that recommendation being proposed and put forward. But it wasn't just this time. There is no difference from this application other than the resolution in terms of the information that's being put forward. That viability report has not changed since members considered this in June. It is the resolution that's been asked to be reconsidered.
So, what we're saying is we agreed with the viability report in June, but there was a 10% affordable housing covered in the 106, which is now being asked to be removed, which has nothing to do with the viability report. So therefore, if there was an appeal against us objecting to that 10% being removed from the 106, it shouldn't really have any influence on the viability report.
The viability report is a constant, as I understand it.
Yes, it has not changed.
But what you've just told me was the viability report in June was the same as the viability report we're looking at today. The only difference is the 10% was included in the 106 resolution, and we're now asking to remove that 10% from the 106 resolution without any influence from the viability report. So what I'm saying is the viability report, from my commercial time, would not be an article you could submit in an appeal, because it's nothing to do with the decision we're making.
But it is. It
No,
is.
well, it isn't, I'm sorry, because it's the same as it was in June, as it is now. The only thing that's changing, as I understand it, is the 106 resolution. And the 106 resolution is not dependent on the viability report.
But it is.
Well,
So the report's setting out in terms of that 0% affordable housing can be provided because of the issues around viability, which takes it below a profitable level that is accepted by government. Members accepted that in June, okay? But what we were understanding is that they were going to provide an over and above of 10%, okay? Like the Persimmon development at phase 11, which was doing it as well as over and above, because again that said 0. However, on going through the actual resolution and trying to implement that, that's where it's become apparent that the applicant was not asking for that, and that it's delivered outside the section 106 and the any conditions.
Was it the applicant or the council that was at fault for misleading the councillors in June?
I think it was a misunderstanding from our perspective. The report that was set out to you initially was the correct
So what was
resolution.
presented in June
It was the
correct.
update that was incorrectly presented and considered, and it's that resolution that we're reconsidering. It is not the viability again.
Well, that's what I was saying. The viability is nothing to do with it. It's the 106 resolution.
Okay, Jim.
Sorry to interject, Chair. I was going to say, I think Councillor Lavery is saying that if the members did refuse it, then they couldn't use the viability appraisal for the reason why it's been rejected. The reason purely is that the resolution doesn't include the 10% in the section 106. That's what you're saying, isn't it? Effectively, you're agreeing with us that we couldn't use the viability appraisal as an appeal. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But neither could they, because when we made the decision in June, we weren't arguing about the viability then. We were accepting 10% in the 106.
I think what Valerie was saying was that we could. Which program did you say? The viability appraisal will be assessed, is what you're saying. But I think there's I think you're both in agreement, but you're both coming at it from different angles. I think.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. We got around in circle, but Kelly wants to come in.
I was just going to say in June, Jim, there wasn't a question about the viability. There was the 10% was voluntary, we understood on their part, and which we were grateful for when they could have gave us nothing. All right. So I get that, and I think we're all frustrated at the change of circumstances and this constantly cropping up, and I think viability needs looking at when these things first happen, because this is happening too often. But I don't see the point of deliberately. I mean, I absolutely agree. I'm frustrated, and I wish we could just. But if knowing I can't, in good conscience, knowing we're going to lose, it seems like a futile exercise in putting something to appeal that we're going to lose. Although I absolutely agree, this is frustrating, but we seem to have no legal room to, which is the frustration, isn't it? We have no legal room to say no. If we do, we'll be doing it because we're annoyed and not because we've got a legal reason to do so. I feel, which I get, and I was tempted. My mind's been changed through this conversation, and you think, well, we should just say no, but I feel like it'll just be because we're annoyed and not because there's a legal reason to do so. Knowing we're going to lose it, it doesn't seem to carry much weight.
Well,
but,
I think we're stuck with the MPPF guidance, which is there, and also if we do lose any appeal, if it goes to appeal, we do lose. It's our residents who pay the appeals, not the council, it's the residents who pay. And I think we need to be aware of Nigel, because I'm going to wind up.
Yeah, no, it's just okay then. So let's supposing we don't agree to it. Okay, I mean the viability is the developer, isn't it? So the developer thinks he's going to lose some cash, right? So he's not going to do it, right? So now, since he's already going ahead with it, even though we haven't, so what costs? What cost does the council incur then for the fact that they can't go ahead because of the viability? Because it's nobody's fault if it's not viable, is it? So, does the council incur costs because the developer can't do the work because it's not worth them doing it?
No, that's not the cost risk. I mean, if the outcome of a refusal to accept this is that the site just sits there and mothballs, that doesn't generate an immediate cost penalty to the council. The cost implication arises out of the potential for an appeal. Now, that's the potential cost implication. We get penalised by an inspector on an appeal.
It's a similar argument, really, though, isn't it? Because it's nobody's fault if the site has become unviable since it was first conceived. Well, then, you know, because it's unviable. It's, you know, why are they going to a legal appeal to make us accept a development that is viable for them, because there's nothing in it for us, is there?
But that is the way. That's the national guidance is steering us towards accepting or dealing with viability, treating it as a material consideration. And if you get a clear viability report that says that you have to compromise what you'd normally be requiring through Section 106 obligations because of viability, that is recognised as a material consideration, and in all likelihood an inspector on appeal will recognise it as such and say, well, we're stuck with our viability, our expert report, and so we've got nothing to fight back with, and that's the problem in an appeal scenario.
Well, on that, nothing to fight back. Reluctantly, I'll accept the recommendation.
Right.
Charles.
I was going to say, we've gone around in circles now. We're starting to issue the arguments again, and we can go on all night going round and round.
We seems to be going round and round.
So
I understand. I came in with open mind. I wasn't there, but I heard the officers. I'll accept that.
Okay. The recommendation is before us. I'll move from the chair that we accept the recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Called you, seconded. All those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, have you got any reasons? You need to put some reasons why we're refusing it. Reasons that planning inspector can accept, and it's got to be allied to whether the site's viable or not.
Well, no, the questions that are raised in the review of the viability report, have they been adequately answered?
So would you like a deferral to ask questions for it to be represented?
I'd propose that.
I don't mind a deferral, I suppose.
Right.
We can argue it all again next time.
Is it going to change anything, sorry, to just
Yeah.
Is it going to change anything that's here, because this is a bit
It might give them the objectors to it, we're all objecting really to it, to get some proper arguments forward if they want to turn it down. So I propose we defer till September meeting. The developer's not going to like it, but we've got to. We're going to. No, they're still appeal if they wanted to on the deferral.
I'll second that, Charles.
Can I just add that we've already said there would be a cost to us if and an appeal, but there's already a cost to our community by not having affordable housing. That is a cost to our community, the people we represent.
Affordable housing is required by those least able to fight the battle.
So procedurally, may I just say something, Charles? If you don't mind. Procedurally, we've voted on the recommendation, and the recommendation was rejected. We've now had a proposal for a deferral, and I think it was it seconded or not?
Yeah, seconded.
Yeah.
And so if
Let's
we're
go for the
but you do need reasons
information.
for deferral. I think are essentially along the lines of Councillor Dugmore's, needing some further clarification on questions on the viability assessment.
On the review of the viability assessment by Mr. Smith. Oh,
So
no.
Spellsbury.
Not called Mr. Smith, is it? Mr. Beeston.
Okay, can we agree to defer till September?
Yeah, I'll vote for that one.
Yeah, agree.
All agreed?
Yeah.
Defer?
I'm abstaining on that.
We've
You're abstaining.
Yeah.
Please abstain.
Proposal on the seconder and
Yeah.
Ian, can you just do the vote again, 'cause I couldn't see who was doing it.
can we? So we've had a proposal and a seconder for a deferral for
Yeah.
some clarification on the viability
And
assessment.
the viability assessment.
And we need all those in
It's the
favour.
points raised in the letter.
Yeah. On the point raised in the letter, the viability letter. Okay.
All those-
Kelly.
Oh no, I was voting.
Just-
No,
So it's who's in favour?
All those in favour of deferring then? I know Peter's abstaining.
I'm going to
Deferment.
Two abstains? Two abstentions then.
That's what
Okay.
deferment is.
Yeah, deferment, yeah. Yeah.
You don't want to come on.